So now moving to item 12, the e-scooter permit recommendations. And what we're dealing with here are recommendations from the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee, where I understand some significant discussion took place. Pauline, as chair of that committee, would you like to introduce this item, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So we've got two things before us. Basically, we've got the issue of the permit, which sits in the recommendations there, and then we've also got an attachment, which is the draft micromobility discussion paper. And I think we need to be clear not to muddy those two things together. So the first one today, the second one is a long-term, that's the draft micromobility discussion paper, is a long-term piece of work, and it needs to be developed in partnership with central government to determine consistent nationwide standards and regulations around the relatively new and increasingly growing micromobility vehicles in New Zealand, growing not just in numbers but also in technology and different forms, as we've just heard from Lime today about the pods. So the whole bit of work needs to be done around that, which will obviously take time. If we were to connect the permit to this discussion paper or this policy development, we would probably have to suspend the permit until the work was done, which could be months or years. So at the committee, we discussed the permit, the charging methodology. We generally agreed as a committee to use the Trading in Public Places bylaw, which is charging per public space, which comes out to about $86 a scooter per year. Any other charging mechanisms were discussed in depth and found that they didn't stack up. They basically would have been similar to taxing. So this seemed to be the most robust and fair way, and we've heard today that there's been discussions with Lime and negotiations, and this has become a method that's agreeable to both parties, the council and Lime. We also discussed a cap. So the cap was based on a formula, which is around 4 to 6 units of scooters per head of population. It seems to work internationally, and that comes out to about 1,600 for Christchurch. Don't forget the cap can be altered at any time according to demand, and that is a staff delegation. So it doesn't have to come back to council to have a cap either increased or decreased. We also discussed the 12-month period for the permit. There was some that wanted it to be longer, but we felt this was probably a really good initial period, and that can be addressed in 12 months' time. Is there room for a local operator if we give Lime 1,000? As in per 1A there, the answer we'd had from staff is a resounding yes. I mean, Lime began with 400, went to 700, now they want 1,000. But it's important to understand that, another operator would also have to be well resourced. I believe Lime has a robust public liability insurance of around $5 million. They'd need to be compliant with some data standards and collecting data, because data is really important. That's got to feed into our future infrastructure planning. And at the moment, I believe from staff that there are actually no other operators lined up who have a really robust application ready as yet. And as I say, if there is one and they are chosen, the cap can be altered as well. The quality of scooters was also discussed, and we were assured that Lime have given us the highest quality, and in fact we may be in line for the next model as soon as it comes off the floor. Safety, of course, came up in discussions, and we all agreed that the burden of safety rests with Lime. Auckland has shown us what can be done if this fails. We've also got a recommendation there, a note that shows that our permit also contains the same shutdown clause. And the issue of user use, and that sits with education. And Lime, as we heard today, is already doing this with repeated messaging to users via their app when they open the app there. And they have indicated to staff that they'll continually work on this education and improving user use. So just wanted to touch on the discussion document briefly as well, because this is, as Lime referred to it, it's an incredible piece of work done by Nick Lovett, who's not here today because he's actually road showing it, I think, in Wellington today, who's wanting to make use of that. It contains a lot of data and information, and also a report by the reference group, which was set up during the trial, and also the results of a survey which was completed by 8,000 people with very, very positive outcomes. And note too that wheeled recreational devices are not regulated under the Land Transport Act 1998, but they must comply with road user rules. So if we're going to develop policies and or regulations, we must ensure consistency nationally. This is occurring around the world, like San Diego, and the collection of data, as I said, is also an essential component for an operator to comply with, to inform infrastructure, including public realm. So the policy which will be developed alongside this will actually address things like pedestrian safety, infrastructure design to support micromobility, whatever form that may take, standardised data from operators nationally, and it will manage fleet sizes and operators, and that will all be worked through. So today I'd just like to draw your attention to the additional resolution that I've put in there, number 5, that we receive the draft discussion document and request staff to work on developing a council policy and work with central government on national standards and regulations around micro-mobility vehicles. And then the note there that the permit that we are discussing today and will vote on today will enable council to suspend the permit immediately without prior notice if urgent action is required to protect public safety.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we've got recommendations on the board in front of us, which are the recommendations that came from the committee with that addition that you've worded for us and put up there as well.
And I'm happy to move it. So
we'll note that you're happy to move those when we get there. That's fine. Are there any questions for staff on this paper? Jamie.
Quick question, and thanks for the work, staff, and also to the committee on this. It's just following on around, and Pauline did speak to it around the cap, but I'm just keen on staff's take on whether or not the cap of 1,600, and I did hear obviously that you have the delegation to be able to amend that if required. But just the thought around, is there any risk of potentially discouraging competitors out of the marketplace just from the outset that they quite literally couldn't match Lime's numbers, assuming that we don't amend that cap number?
I don't think so. So Lime started with 400 and over time have increased to 700. They don't deploy exactly 700 each and every day, and so providing the space in the cap over and above Lime's specific amount, we think that number's quite reasonable and quite attractive. And there are a lot of small operators who provide between 4 scooters and anywhere up into the hundreds. And there's another operator already in Akaroa that's doing 4 scooters. So the models vary depending on the type of operator. So we think that the remaining capacity strikes the right balance between ensuring that there is potential there, but equally not having dozens of operators saturating the city with products that are only used by a smaller proportion of the population.
All good, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mike.
Thank you. Obviously it's been mentioned quite a bit that Lime started with 400. But do you know if their business would have been sustainable had they stayed at 400?
That's not a question for staff. I don't know what their
that's
business model is.
Yeah, but that's fine. So you don't know they would be sustainable?
No.
Thank you. Anne.
Thanks. Thank you. It's going to be an interesting discussion going forward. Just wondering, there is confusion about where to use Lime scooters, and just hoping that...
Is your turn?
Just wondering when that clarification will come through in terms of where people can use Lime scooters.
Yeah, so central government are currently working on that. They're working on this package called the Accessible Streets package, and as part of that, it will relate to where devices can be ridden. And the current plan is to get decisions in April. And then go to public consultation mid-year. Yeah, and then I guess rule changes can take up to 9 months, so that would be the concern, but it might be something that councillors could recommend to them to try and accelerate.
Thank you. Any further questions? Jimmy.
Regarding to the council recommendation, bullet point 5. I just want to know the timeline. For instance, like the council policy will be developed. How much time will be come out?
That would be something that we'd work over the next 12 months. I'd expect. I mean, this is an area which is continuing to emerge, and if you read the discussion document, you can see that. So that's something we'd work. We've learned a lot through the trial, and we'll continue to learn as we go on, and as we work with government as well around the work they're doing. That Stefan's just talked to. Yeah, it'll probably take us around 12 months.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you about the one of the inconveniences that some of the public find is that the scooters could be left parked in challenging places, or so they obstruct, for example, footpath. Do you know, is there a way that, and I would like to ask Lime this at the time, if there's a way that their technology could actually incentivise tidy parking, or equally add an extra charge for untidy parking?
I don't know if I can answer the latter part of the question, but one of the issues that Lime proactively raised with council staff when we met over the last month or so is they're quite keen to provide some, I think they call them parking corrals, which they've successfully trialled internationally. And so in some locations where there's a lot of Lime scooters, we do encourage, and the Lime app encourages parking in the line of the street furniture, pretty much, so you're not interfering either with the footpath or with the roadway. And so one of the things that we will work with Lime on, any other scooter operators, is whether in places where there's a large number of scooters parked, and if you think around some of the opportunities in the central city, or bus stops, or the bus exchange, or Cashel Mall and things like that, about whether it would be appropriate to mark out some areas that would encourage Lime users to park in those areas and to pick up and drop off in those areas. So we think that's a good proposal. Lime have also been responsive to council feedback on locations, and they have a geo fencing approach via the app, and so it's marked out as red where you can't either use or obviously park Lime scooters. And so I think they've recently added both Victoria Square and Margaret Mayhew Playground to the Botanic Gardens at our request, which limits where users can go.
My other question, if I may, is perhaps the cap being increased, is the potential for, say, some of the additional scooters to actually in effect be based in more suburban areas than the central city?
Yeah, we're hoping that would be the case. So as I said earlier, we're continuing to learn as we go through this, and with the cap at 700. So we're hopeful that with an increase that you'd see that move out more into the suburbs, which I think there's demand out there for that.
Thank you. Yanni.
Thank you. I've heard the advice that we're looking at how we do tables and chairs in terms of the licence fee. And my understanding of how we do tables and chairs is actually we get a market valuation. So we actually work out, we get an independent market valuation to support that price. Have we done that in terms of the ability for e-scooter companies, in terms of what the market value would be, rather than just a figure that it's quite hard to understand what the basis for the figure that's been proposed is?
So the figure proposed is based on that market value, so there's a calculation behind that figure, and that's in the in the policy.
Sorry, what's it based, the market of what?
The value of the land. So it's based on the rental value.
Right,
of
so normally,
the land.
Sorry, it's a silly question, but as I understand it, when we do a market valuation for things like table and chairs, we would look at, similar types of activities in terms of what that business is doing and what the benefit is to the business. That's how most of our valuations are done. For the purpose of what that space is being used for, would have an impact on the market value. Have we done that?
We don't do market valuations for tables and chairs. We do under the trading and events and public places policy, we have a figure that is informed by the valuation of the underlying land for using public space, but
for hospitality.
A valuation for using public space. So all of the activities under trading and events and public places policy. So the $172.50 is the current fee. If there's a valuation, I think the valuations are done annually, then it goes up by whatever the valuation is. There's not a discrimination between whether it's a cafe chair or a high-end restaurant chair or a gelato stand or a Lime scooter. It's a standard fee under the policy.
Right, so there's no difference based on the usage of that public space and what revenue that brings in. It's just basically a flat determination for what people using that space, occupying it.
That's correct.
Land value.
Yeah. I note that other cities around the world have charged a license fee, like the tables and restaurants, tables and chairs, and also a per ride fee. I'm still struggling to understand why we're not expecting it or not talking or recommending a per ride fee. Like, what's the problem with doing that, given that that's been done elsewhere around the world?
So this was covered pretty extensively at the committee, where there are deputations on a similar matter. We've also covered it in the advice that's been provided to councillors. The summary is, internationally there are lots of different models for how fees can be charged, and depending on cities' particular arrangements around their policies and bylaws, there's different approaches. The staff advice and the committee recommendation in this instance is we have an existing trading and events in public places policy that is designed to facilitate access to public space by a private company, and we think that's the most appropriate mechanism for, in this case, Lime's use of public space. There's no mechanism available to council without entering into a commercial arrangement with a private operator and all private operators to effectively put a tax or per ride fee on all of the rides. The discussion at the committee was that would also change the type of relationship that we have. We would effectively be in partnership then with this private operator, and that's not council's core business. We provide a public space, and in this instance we charge private operator for the use of that public space. The analogy that we've discussed before is for a cafe, we don't put a per meal or a per beverage charge on that cafe operator of $5 or $10 or $1 or whatever it would be per meal. We apply the set fee of $172.50 per square metre. We think, for the sake of consistency, that's a vastly superior approach than trying to enter into a far more complicated and potentially risky commercial arrangement.
Right, and just a final question, and this was raised when we first discussed the permit, but in terms of addressing I note some other cities around the world where Lime contributes to a percentage of the ride to a charitable cause or a non-profit, and also some interesting stuff around ensuring equity of access across lower socioeconomic areas. Have you had any discussion with Lime about, giving back, addressing any sort of socioeconomic barriers to use, or donating, to some good causes, as they've done in other parts of the world?
We haven't had those conversations with Lime, and I wouldn't have thought it would be part of the trading events and public places policy, but we can have those conversations with Lime. On the second point that you raise about the, which is similar to Councillor Clearwater's question about the location of the scooters. So Lime deploy the scooters based on their knowledge via their algorithms about where they'll be utilised. So with a greater number of scooters, it allows them to penetrate different areas, and so we are very keen to see a spread of their deployment, so that we make sure that we don't have parts of the city that don't have access to what could otherwise be a good first and last mile transport solution.
Right. Sorry, the current data, which is on page 103, is that's kind of the map with the green blobs. That shows that actually the lower sectional areas don't tend to have very good access at all. Is that basically correct in terms of the analysis that we've done to date of the user and the deployment?
Well, we haven't overlaid it with socioeconomic status, so...
Well, I mean, you can look at Aranui, Phillipstown, Charleston, a little bit of the inner city east. You can see the areas that we know of.
And of course, in any commercial model, there's a balance between adequacy of supply and demand. We don't know what the demand is in those areas. And I mean, again, for ourselves as the issuer of the permit, whilst these might be concerns that a person may have, this is a commercial model which is run by Lime, and they will do what's right for their commercial model. I don't know that we would necessarily be getting into regulating that, you know, certain numbers of scooters should be available in certain areas. There may be things we can do to encourage that, but equally it's up to Lime as the commercial operator to encourage demand in certain parts of the city where demand may be lower, or to ensure that demand is met where it's not currently being met. But that would be a matter for the commercial operator.
That's correct. This is simply a snapshot. So we know from our analysis that actually the scooters travel all over the city, and we've got it on the Smart View. You can see the scooters travel all over the city, and riders pick up in point A and drop off in point B. So there is a regular redistribution of the scooters during the course of the day, but as the Deputy Mayor has pointed out, trying to regulate where they're either deployed or held would drive perverse outcomes.
Thank you. Glenn.
So I've seen them surfing on the waves in New Brighton. No, my question is 8.12, and just curious about this because we carried out a survey which obviously showed overwhelming favourable support. 8.12, page 92, says for the council to refuse to issue future e-scooter permits, we would need to undertake consultation. So my question is, we haven't actually undertaken consultation in the first place. We've undertaken a survey, and to refuse them, we should have a clear policy approach, and we're not at that point yet. It's in the resolution. So why does it work that way but not the other way, in terms of actually going ahead with what potentially we're going to do now?
The survey is a type of consultation. Consultation takes many forms. So we've had some views on the nature of, you know, the use of the scooters at the moment and the positive response to that. If we were proposing, so at the moment under the Public Places Bylaw and the Trading and Events and Public Places Policy, if the council is going to bring in a policy of saying we're not going to provide permits for these things at all, if somebody applies to us under that bylaw, I think that perhaps change in policy would be something that we should consult further about.
But that survey suffices under the LGA threshold over consultation?
Well, in terms of continuing, you know, at the moment through the Public Places Bylaw and Policy, we can grant permits. And we have been granting permits for all sorts of activities. Okay. So if we were going to have a policy approach that actually for this type of activity we're not going to grant permits at all, I think that would be something we would need further consultation on.
Okay. Thanks, Judy. Yeah.
Thank you. So Pauline, you're happy to move this? Do I have a seconder? Vicky. So moved by Pauline, seconded by Vicky. Is there any debate? Yanni.
You know, I think, I think it was fairly predictable that as a flat city, we would see that these scooters were really successful. So I think that's a real they have been, I think, when you look at it, a real positive for our city. I still have some concerns over just how we're charging and how we're addressing some of those issues of accessibility. And from everything I've seen, other cities around the world actually have been quite progressive in that regard. I appreciate that we've got a discussion document and that this licence is only for, or permit is only for 12 months, and I think that gives us time to work through the discussion document, some of those other issues that the questions have been focused on today. So I think, you know, on balance, I'm happy to support this. I am concerned about the whole issue of cap and demand, and you know, I don't think we want to see just a monopoly. Likewise, I don't think we want to see a situation where we just get scooters everywhere not being used. I understand that, but it does seem to me by having a cap, you do limit the opportunity for competition, which should actually drive prices a bit lower. I think I am concerned that the pricing is quite high for some parts of our communities. I think, you know, that will be a barrier, but again, we can address that hopefully through the discussion document. I personally think that the fees are too low, and I think we should be looking at getting a charge per ride that goes back into providing the infrastructure. But as I've said, we've got the discussion document, let's work through that. I think ultimately though, what we are seeing is a revolution in transport, and in a city like Christchurch that is flat, this actually is something that we really need to think holistically about, including how we're designing roads and pathways, etc. And you know, that just should not be lost on us as we make decisions around roads going forward. What is the adequate width to have safe places where people can use these types of micro mobility that we're seeing, which again, as we're flat, there's no doubt that we're going to be very popular in our city. So just I'm happy to support this today. I think there's still a number of issues that we need to work through. The 12-month permit will give us time to do that.
Thank you. Jamie.
Oh, Jimmy or Jamie?
Jamie.
Jimmy. Sorry, Jimmy.
I'll come to you in a minute, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Look, in my view, the Lime e-scooters have made so much progress in changing habits of getting people out of cars in the city, and to be perfectly frank, that they've probably done far more in the few short months that they've been in Christchurch than what our millions of dollars of spending and the dubious race to the bottom system that can operate. So you have to really take your hat off to that. I think Tim said earlier that, you know, you struggle to see people without a smile on their face, and that's across the board, age-wise as well. So I do most certainly agree that we need more clarity around the rules. I think that's obvious, but that's not what we're discussing today specifically. I also think that it makes absolute sense for them to be able to travel in the cycleways. So all in all, I'm a fan of the Lime scooters. I'm very supportive of the recommendations. The only word of caution that I'd like to flag now is that going forward, I think that it's imperative that we're mindful to not be so onerous around rules or pricing, so as a result you price any competition out of the marketplace, because the competition is good, and that will ensure that the technology continues to improve and evolve and be rolled out here, and it also will ensure that the pricing benefits Christchurch residents and visitors. So just rapt to see Lime scooters here in Christchurch, and look forward to seeing more of them, and potentially other operators as well going forward.
Thank you. Glenn.
I think with the Lime, something I've noticed, there's something about a spontaneity about them in our city, and I think that they brought a joy, a joie de vivre in a city which needs it. It's a good fit for Christchurch. They've gone down well. I met with 9 residents ages 70 to 80 over stop banks nearby in the ward. We talked about the stop banks, but they initiated a conversation over Lime scooters, and they said to me, please keep them. They love them, and that kind of matches a Facebook comment of a 70-year-old woman roaring down the road, big grin on her face. Carolyn Blanchfield made that comment, thought it was fantastic. I think looking at this, the public transport unintended consequence is fascinating, given that I think you pay a little bit more than you may, for instance, on some bus rides or some other public transport options. I'm happy over the braking issues. It's a good fit with the city in that respect as well. Happy over the demand-supply equation. I've read the report sitting behind that. often with these things, it's a bit like housing. You fix the houses, develop the policy later. It's a bit like this over mobility scooters. There's risk everywhere. The press tells us today, you know, 92 banana skin claims from ACC in the last year. Anything can happen. I was out cycling this morning. A cyclist got their wheels jammed in the tram tracks, fell off, whacked their head on the pavement, said the helmet saved my life. I mean, there's risk all around us, so I think it's good. It makes the city feel young again. And as Aaron would probably say, don't slime the lime.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you. I actually want to move an amendment at this time, which should pop up in a second, which is note the staff intention to issue a 12-month permit for Lime technology with a proposed increase in Lime's permit cap from 700 to 1,000 scooters, but council recommends to staff that the proposed increase in Lime's permit cap be from 700 to 800 scooters, or 50% of the citywide cap.
All right, so this is proposing, if this were successful, it would bring the Lime cap down from 1,000 to 800, or 50% of any new total if the 1,600 were to be changed.
Yes.
All right, so you're moving this as an amendment. Is there a seconder for this amendment? Tim.
Yeah, I'll talk to the amendment then. And I'll keep this brief. And this amendment is not an anti-Lime amendment. It's an amendment about fairness. I believe giving Lime the lion's share of a citywide cap may shut the door on other e-scooter providers, potentially local ones. There has to be a sweet spot for the ideal number of scooters from a single provider to make their business sustainable. And if we lift Lime to 1,000, we may be wiping out the opportunity for some other good providers. While I wouldn't want to see a large number of different providers, limiting Lime to 50% of the citywide caps gives the opportunity for one or two other providers to enter the scene. Having the right number of providers will drive better competition, and e-scooter users will become the winners. Also, if one of the providers of e-scooters has a serious defect and is taken off the street, like what has happened in Auckland, there would still be sufficient number of scooters left to use.
Thank you. So when we come to voting, what we'll do is take a vote on the amendment first, and either that'll carry or it'll be lost, and then we'll vote on the substantive resolution, either with the amendment included or not, as the case may be. So I've got Jimmy next. Jimmy.
Thank you. Yeah. I just want to remind our fellow councillors, particularly our vision is a city of opportunity for all. So we welcome to new idea, new people, new ways of doing things. And also we always emphasize this city is innovative and a sustainable city. So Lime e-scooter will try for several months. That's a new try. But at least this city, we open to this new try, new technology. I think that's very, very crucial, very important to everyone, especially the not only this one. We have several different autonomous, feeder, etc. Try to make this city to be a place, give them the test and certify this innovative and sustainable city. And so because all the people around the 400K, it's not a big scale city. So we need to focus on all the target and all the advantage. So my view through this one, probably can create a global brand. They put a Christchurch at the heart of this micro mobility vehicle, but with some other autonomous is kind of future mobility service ecosystem, etc. So that's very crucial. But over the last week, probably our fellow councillors, same, myself, received lots of email. Majority is a support. We would like to have extension this kind of the Lime ecosystem and increase the number, extension for another the 12 years. But few of them particularly concerned the kind of safety issue. But today we listen to the staff and also to the Lime, the company, they particularly emphasize they would like to, to support and provide the safe, sustainable, convenient transportation system. Also, I ask staff, what is the timeline regarding to those council will establish policy and also engage with NZTA to try to establish the new standard of the regulations. This kind of commitment can mitigate those the country first effect and minimize those effects. Another one is also consider, we might, based on current figure, regarding to the rental fee. But this rental fee actually is under the trading and the events in public place policy. We just follow this policy. But that's still, that's important for us because the Lime, they pay the tax, they pay the rates, they pay the lease, the rental fee, etc. Still the benefit regarding to the financial aspect. So I'm supported the council, the recommendation, other than amendment. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I've got Tim.
Just have a point of process in
I was going to ask the same.
Yeah.
I put an amendment, I just want to clarify it. Shouldn't that amendment now just be debated and that put before going back to the original motion?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
All right. I'm quite happy to work in that way. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned that the amendment was put after the debate had started as well, so there are some speakers who haven't had the opportunity to speak on the amendment.
I did signal very...
Yeah, no, you did. And that's the reason that, we're doing it the way we are, but that's fine. All right, so let's deal with the amendment first, so that we then know what we're dealing with. So Mike, you've spoken obviously in favour of the amendment. Are there any other speakers on the amendment? Pauline?
Yeah, look, this came up at the committee as well, and it wasn't supported there either. I disagree with Mike's argument, or Councillor Davis's argument, that the recommended cap will shut the door on others. We've had sound responses to our questions that it will not do that. We also know that the cap can be altered by staff through their delegations at any time. So if another operator was to come in and want 1,000, they will probably be able to organise that, depending on the nature of their business case. So I think we need to respect what Lime has done in the city here. They've shown incredible initiative. They've produced a really good business model. They're operating really well. They've shown incredible willingness to work with our staff, and I think those relationships are very important in all these things. They actually did want exclusivity in Christchurch. So what they're accepting here is far less than that, and it's not actually very much less than 50% of the market at 1,000 out of 1,600 anyway. So I really don't think we want to tamper with what the staff are recommending here. They've obviously worked through a very strong negotiation with Lime. This is the recommendation, and it's workable for everybody. So I will not be supporting the amendment.
All right, thank you. So this is just on the amendment. I'm keen to obviously move this on. Tim, this is just on the amendment at the moment? Yep.
I think one of the things why I'm supporting the amendment is there's no question, no one has ever commented, or I've heard criticism of the cost. So with the competition, what competition also drives is safety initiatives and safety innovations, and I think you've got to look at that as well. So the comments that I've had from people who have all had smiling faces on Lime scooters, and I applaud Lime for the work that they've done, but competition also drives safety, as I said, safety initiatives and safety features, and that is why I'm going to support this. Thank you.
Aaron, on the amendment.
Yeah, I'm not for this form of cap, in fact, or any of the other caps that are in the substantive as well. And the reason for that is listening to a Peter Thiel podcast, competition's for losers. And what I mean by, well, what he means by that is that what competition often does by driving prices down is drive quality down, drive wages down. You drive a whole lot of things down when you compete, because competition is a race to the bottom. It's not a race to the top. So careful what you ask for, and imagine if you compare this to other industries which could have competition, like public transport. That doesn't often go that well, and heaven forbid if councils had competition and you can set up another council within the same city, what that might look like. Lime has worked because it's just Lime. If there was 10 out there right now, you'd struggle. Then you've got to have 10 apps on your phone, and you've got to try and find the one that you use, and then you're checking off the price. It's not efficient. The model that's started up, essentially these scooters, which none have really made a profit globally yet, as they start up in cities, it'll just be first and best dressed will be the model that will work around the world. If you get a flood to the market, you're going to get a flood of problems, not a flood of solutions and better outcomes. So I just think the market should dictate, and if people want to bring in a whole lot of other ones, then so be it. If they don't, so be it. And if one grows really large, so be it. It's because that's what the public will choose.
Thank you. Anything else on the amendment?
Can I just, with the blessing of the seconder, make a slight change to the amendment? Instead of saying to 800 scooters or 50%, to up to 50%. So remove.
So removing the 800.
Or, and just put to up to. Yeah, and remove 800 scooters or.
So Tim, you're comfortable with that? Yep. Okay, great. Anybody else want to speak to this amendment? I'm not in favour of it. I'm quite happy with what the committee decided. I'm quite happy with the committee's recommendation. I think that leaves room for competition. I see all the benefits of competition and another operator or operators being able to come into the market. But equally, there's a danger that if you were to have lime capped at only 50%, the other 50% may never be taken up, and there may in fact be demand. It might lead to an artificial inflation of the overall figure that could in turn, if other operators came into the market later, lead to an oversaturation of the market. So I see the benefits of competition, but I think that the committee recommendation allows for that, and noting the point that's been well made that the cap can be moved in the future should that be necessary, either as demand increases or as other opportunities become apparent in what really is going to be quite a dynamic environment. So I won't be voting for the amendment. I'm happy with the committee recommendation in this regard. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour of the amendment, yep, so all of those in favour of the amendment say aye. Those against say no. No. So that's not carried. So we are now back to the substantive motion as moved by Pauline and seconded by Vicky. So does anybody else want to speak to the substantive? So I've got Tim, Aaron, Pauline and Raf.
Look, thank you, and I'll go back to just before I got interrupted, but I want to thank Lime for looking at the environment and the speed zones, etc. The technology's there, but to implement it in different environments is extremely difficult and complicated. So I thank you for the work that you're doing on that, because let's face it, if you're going to trip home to Sumner at 15 k's an hour, you'll be there a week. But to trip around, you know, Central City at close to 30 k's isn't for this city, I don't believe, safety-wise, isn't sustainable. So thank you very much for the work you're doing. With regards to what I mentioned before about speed, about safety, innovations, etc., following on from the race to the bottom, if that were true, we wouldn't have Volvo or a number of others. What you do have, though, is people looking for the safest option that they can afford. So if you are shopping for bike helmets for your children, everyone has a budget, you look for the best option, the most safest, through consumer or whatever that you do for whatever you're buying, toaster, could be anything, car, etc. So I do think that competition does actually drive safety. I'm not really interested in the arguments we've been using about cost, etc., because as I said, no one that I have spoken to with a smiling face on a Lime has bitched or moaned about the cost. But there are a lot of people concerned about safety, the safety features. Lime here today mentioned what they are doing, and I applaud them for that, but it is, for me, and the people that have spoken to me, the prime concern. So I've made that clear, and I'm sure you'll take that on board, so thank you.
All right, now I had indicated we'd break for morning tea at around 11. What we'll do is finish this item and then break for morning tea once we've made a decision on this one. So I've got Pauline, unless as the mover you wanted to wait till the end. Yep, okay, so we'll come back to you at the end. So Aaron, Raf and Vicky. Aaron.
Yeah, I will be supporting this today in all its parts. I had originally asked for the cap bits to be put separately, but the chair of the committee's recommendation and her explanation of that did make sense, that it can be changed at different times depending on what the market is doing, so I'm happy with that. I was dubious to start with when Lyme first came to town to whether this would be successful. We're a flat city with pretty mild weather and adventurous people, so it's a pretty good combination to have the future, or one of the futures of transport and public transport excel. Unlike other parts of this country, it's gone incredibly well here, and I applaud that. Most of it, and the 99% that was referred to of users, are pretty smart and respectful of the environment and those around them. There'll always be idiots, and they hopefully stay in the 1% or less. Most people believe in self-preservation, so they're not going to do ridiculous things on their scooters. The odd one isn't, or they've been drinking, so they tend to be where your accidents come from. And I will say that it is a good lead-in as new forms of transport come around to also reflect on our current forms of transport, and one of them's around bikes. And I wouldn't have thought that the Lime scooters would have had near the success they had if you enforce the same rules as you do with bikes, including the bike helmet. And I think there will be a review of those coming up. We're one of 3 countries in the world with the helmet law. I'm glad it didn't apply to the cycles, and I mean to the scooters. And I think going forward, there is a chance that government could bring up enough rules to kill the scooter industry anyway. Let's hope that doesn't happen, because at the moment it appears to be relatively successful, and I just implore people to be really safe on them and enjoy them.
Raf.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to support what's proposed here. I think for me the bigger issue is the lessons from the success of these scooters. I mean, one, that there is a lot of disruption happening in the transport space. The second is actually, I mean, this is being driven by people. I mean, people are responding to this. This is being driven by consumer demand. And I think when I look at a lot of our transport planning, it's still 20th century, it's still very linear, it's still telling people how they should move around. And actually what this is demonstrating is people are moving around in very different ways, and they like to move around in very different ways as well. So I think really for me, what is interesting about the success of this scooter program is that we need more focus on why people move around and how they like to move around. And I think before we implement big transport plans and huge transport infrastructure, we need to spend more time talking to people about their mobility requirements. And I think that's the big lesson of this.
Thank you. Vicky.
Completely. I agree also with what Jimmy said about Christchurch is a city of opportunity, welcomed, and the line goes that we welcome new people, new ideas, new ways of doing things, and this is one of those, a new way of doing things. It's shared transport, so you don't have to own the vehicle. We've done a very similar thing with electric car share with Yugo. We're looking at an autonomous vehicle testing zone in Bexley, and actually with the airport's helping to build new autonomous vehicles. It does mean that NZTA are going to have to change a number of the rules, and they're going to need to do that quickly. And as Raf says, this disruption in transport, in modes of transport, is coming incredibly quickly. Hugo mentioned that they're looking at electric car pods so that people can go from A to B and share cars, and then they have electric bike share, as I understand it, in Sydney as well, which I'd also like to see here. So we know that the disruption is coming. Christchurch as a city has always welcomed that innovation and that new way of doing things, and I think that not accepting Lyme into the city and welcoming them would be about as popular as leaving chlorine in the water, actually. So I think it's great. I like the cap, the way that the staff have worked through. I liked the report on the new micro-mobility and all of the options that are coming at us. I think it's incredibly exciting stuff, and I'd like us to embrace it quickly.
Mike.
Thanks. I always supported all the resolutions apart from 1A, and I spoke to that at the amendment, so I won't address that again. Look, I agree, Lime's been a really great success for the city, and it's opened the door for another mode of transport, and it just shows actually what can be achieved. And yeah, there is a bit of work to be done around, I guess, some of the rules, and we do need to hope that that regulation doesn't actually, I guess, dampen the spirit of the city and actually stop people using limes, which happened to bikes when they introduced a compulsory helmet law, and obviously decades later that's reduced by 50%, and suddenly we've got one of the highest obesity rates in the world. So look, I agree with a lot of the stuff that Aaron's said. Like, we've created a city, and the infrastructure that's been developed is a lot more user-friendly for bikes, and in that case also for people on Lime scooters, and there needs to be a bit of work to ensure that the scooters can actually legally go into those cycle lanes. But it's coming along, and I think we need to keep working on there and get to the point where we actually have really good use of our transport system, that everyone can freely move in a safe manner. At the moment, we've got a lot of vulnerable people on the footpaths that some have disabilities that are actually a little bit nervous about the Lime scooters zipping along, and then you put them on the road with no helmet, and they're zipping in between cars that are doing 50 k's. So, you know, the best place is in the cycle lanes. So we need to make sure we keep trying to develop our network of cycle infrastructure, which is going to be obviously more than just cycle infrastructure. So look, I'm very supportive of the e-scooters and what they do into this city.
So today's debate really has been obviously about the Lime scooters because it's their permit that we're talking about, but a lot of the comments relate to e-scooters and personal transport devices in general. And Lime scooters, as we've seen in recent months, have absolutely transformed the way that we use the city, the way that we move around the city. I've been using them, and you know, they're perfect for a certain type of journey. And actually they're perfect for a certain type of journey that links the public transport network with final destinations, and I hope might have even influenced people's opportunities and choices to use the bus network and using Lime for the last mile or the beginning and the end of their journey. So really what we're talking about here is a huge shift in the way people move around the city and use transport, and Lime is the example of it, and I'm sure there will be plenty of other examples, both with other scooter operators coming into the market, but other types of personal device or other ways of moving people around in the future. I'm told that the number of personally owned scooters has increased nationally by around 1,000% in the last 12 months. So this isn't just about people renting scooters, it's about people also using scooters that they own. That immediately leads to that next piece of work that Pauline referred to in her introduction, which is the policy settings in the transport space, both at the national level and at the local level, taking a joined up approach nationally so that you don't have a different set of rules in every city as to what you can and can't do, so that people know what is and isn't acceptable, but bringing the transport rules up to speed with where we're actually at in terms of the development of these types of devices, realising that this is a very, very dynamic space and will continue to be. And these sort of innovations, whether it's Lime scooters or whether it's something else, are absolutely changing the way that people move around, getting cars off the road, reducing congestion, and we as a city which is progressive absolutely need to be working in a way that allows for that to happen, where Christchurch can be seen as an exemplar of the way that we do these new modes of transport that other cities are looking at to say, well, this worked in Christchurch, how can we replicate that in our city? We're fortunate that we've got a flat city, we're fortunate that we've got a city with good infrastructure. Absolutely agree with Mike that the policy needs to change to make it obvious what infrastructure is and isn't appropriate for these types of devices. services. We've invested into cycleways and cycle lanes. We need to make sure that all of that infrastructure is able to be used as safely as possible, thinking of the way that it would be appropriate for people to use these type of devices. But yeah, I'm very supportive of allowing Lyme to continue with what really has been a success for Christchurch. Absolutely agree with the point that's been made that generally when you see people on Lyme, they're looking happy. It's actually got people out and about in a new way. I think at 12 months we're providing the right level of certainty but allowing room to manoeuvre in future. I think the point that the cap is movable has been well made, and that'll be driven by demand. Very comfortable with the committee recommendation and very happy to support this today. Pauline, I'll let you close the debate.
Thank you. Look, I won't labour on this, but I really do honestly want to recognise the work that staff have put into this. Even before the trial, there was so much hidden work that went in, and also once again this document that Nick Lovett has assembled is a brilliant piece of work. And also the way that we staff set up the reference group in such a short time and monitored that and feedback into this. The survey with 8,000 respondents over a period of 1 month during that trial, I think it was December to January. Just really, really efficient, brilliant work, and I think it's really worth actually highlighting that. So obviously I'm happy to support Lyme's continuation today, but also to welcome other operators in the micro-mobility vehicle area. Look, we've been assured, as we don't need to go over again, that any capacity will be sufficient. It can be altered, so there's plenty of room for another operator or operators to enter the market. We know competition is healthy. Although I think I respect what Aaron's saying, we don't want too much because then you get a reduction in service. So it's all a balance. So I think that Lyme too, they've boosted Christchurch and they've actually encouraged others to dust off their old kick scooters, especially kids, but adults too. And a lot more private scooters out there on the road. We're actually seeing more people walking and biking, and I think this is a domino effect that I think we should attribute to Lyme particularly, because it's actually encouraged people to get out. So we're now actually moving towards our climate goals, our climate change goals, by reducing our emissions and, as Mike says, becoming healthier and more active. I touched upon the importance of a good relationship between the council staff and Lyme. It's really important to protect that, and also with any other operators that want to come on board. And I thank staff for working through this the way they have. Look, this is all new stuff here, so we're looking at continual improvements. We're at the ground level here, so things will change. We've talked of things like possible speed management through either their software or firmware or geofencing. I don't know how they'd do it. But whenever we look at these things, we've got to be balanced so that we do not discourage the users. So we don't want to cram people down into compromising the service and then having it not being used. We also don't want a nanny state through over-regulation. And I know this is the view of Minister Twyford as well. So somehow this is probably going to settle down more with time. And we know that Lyme have indicated that they are working hard on educating their users as well every time they log in. So it has certainly stirred up engagement in Christchurch, and most of it's been incredibly positive. So I think once again I just want to thank the staff for all this complex work on this, and especially over the last week. So I'll be supporting this today.
Thank you. So as requested, I'll put clause 1A first. So all those in favour of clause 1A, say aye. Aye. Against? So Mike and Aaron against. So that's carried. And then I'll put the remainder of the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Now let's break for morning tea. We'll just take 10 minutes.